from Congress to come up and discuss with the 4 committees earlier this week about our delisting of certain Russia sanctions. I would say we immediately responded and agreed to come up 2 days later. The committees informed us they wanted to include all of Congress. We welcomed that opportunity to come up and brief them in a classified setting. Not only did I come up, but I brought our senior management team as well as our senior intel officer that manages our sanctions program so that we could deal with any technical questions or any questions. I was somewhat surprised to see the speaker's comment. I was available. Not only did we accommodate them and waited while they were voting, but we sat through and gave them close to an hour and a half and answered all their questions. I would just comment that this administration has been tougher on Russia and done more Russian sanctions than before. We will continue to do that. This was a very specific technical discussion to talk about several companies that were not the subject of the original sanctions, but were picked up because we sanctioned Deripaska and as a result of his ownership and control. I want to thank the Treasury team, both the career people and the political people who have been working on this for months. We will continue to work with Congress to make sure they understand the technical issues as we're required to. With that, I'd be happy to take a few questions.
This 30-day review period.
We received a question today as to whether we would give them more time. I assured them that there was no objective to do anything over the holidays. We're going to take that into consideration. I told Chairman Neal and Kevin Brady that I would get back to them quickly, and we will seriously take into consideration. We want to make sure that Congress has the appropriate amount of time to review this.
Mr. Secretary, the Speaker says you barely spoke and that other officials read from an unclassified document, and that's why she called it one of the worst briefings from the trial.
Well, I have respect for the Speaker, but I was somewhat shocked when I saw that. She wasn't there for the entire period. I was available. I answered, I think, at least half the questions. I brought up technical experts who were the experts of the people, both the career person who runs OFAC, the political person who is our undersecretary for terrorist financing. I think you know this administration has done more sanctions, whether it's Iran, Syria, Venezuela, Russia. I think, as you've heard me say, I spend close to 50% of my time on sanctions. We gave an intel assessment, so I was somewhat shocked at the assessment. And I would just comment, I voluntarily came up here 2 days after I had the request.
Mr. Secretary,
Yes,
are you feeling confident that Treasury will be able to lift the sanctions on the 3 companies?
It's not a question of confident or non-confident. Treasury has made its best judgment in applying the law and regulations. For us to have effective sanctions programs, we both have to have a way that companies that are affected by ownership and control will be picked up, and then a fair way that they'll be delisted. Treasury, I think, as you know, has the authority to enter into these agreements. We consulted with and we notified Congress, and we'll continue to work with them and hear their response.
If I can ask about Davos, do you still plan to go to the summit in Davos? And then in terms of the China trade talks, can you talk about the ability of the U.S. to host a delegation from China while the shutdown is ongoing?
As it relates to Davos, we'll consider that. I would just comment that I currently do have lots of meetings scheduled with my counterparts, finance ministers from the G7 and the G20 on some very important economic and security issues. So I will be discussing with the White House whether we'll continue that trip. My guess is if we do continue it, it will be in a scaled back version. And yes, the current intent is that the Vice Premier Liu He will most likely come and visit us later in the month, and I would expect that the government shutdown would have no impact. We will continue with those meetings, just as we sent a delegation to China.
Have you received any calls or talked with any counterparts from Europe concerned about Rusal remaining on the sanctions list? And several lawmakers have insinuated that this decision is linked somehow to giving the Kremlin favor because of some sort of collusion. Is there any basis to those insinuations?
There's no linkage whatsoever. I think, as you know, we've been tougher on Russia sanctions than anybody before. If anything, we are trying to de-link these companies so that they will not be under the influence and control of a sanctioned oligarch. That's our objective. And as it relates to the Europeans, I think, as you know, I get comments from the Europeans all the time on our sanctions programs when I meet with them. So yes, I have had comments from the Europeans on these sanctions where some of these companies do business in there, but that's no different than I receive comments about Iran sanctions and everything else. This is not politically motivated, and this is being done on, these companies were picked up not because they did bad things. These companies were picked up because of their ownership and their control, and we're trying to segregate it. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.